Hi and welcome. In this video we will be looking at, as Caddy themselves say, the ultimate server. In this video we will learn how you can set up your own Caddy server to easily add TLS to your traffic. Caddy is a server that functions as a web server, a reverse proxy, and a load balancer. And what's special about Caddy is that it actually handles certificate management automatically by default. And this is really handy. So it will fetch a certificate for you and it will install the certificate on your server. It will also renew this certificate so you don't have to even consider your certificate anymore. It's actually really amazing once you have Caddy set up. And one other thing that's really interesting about Caddy is how easy it is to get started. Let's begin by taking a look at what Caddy has to offer us and how it can offer us automatic certificate management. So Caddy boasts a pretty strong feature set. So it can serve static files, it can work as a reverse proxy, and you can use it for HTTPS and certificate management. And it also makes using HTTPS during local development very easy. So one thing that's kind of important to understand about Caddy is how does the certificate management work? Because we will be uploading our security basically to them, because we will rely on Caddy to actually work properly to give us our certificate so that we can use encrypted traffic. Caddy is running something called Acme. Now, Acme is a protocol built to automate certificate management. So that's basically what Caddy is using. Now, to make a really simple explanation of Acme, we can actually just put up Caddy here. So we have our Caddy server, and our Caddy server will be talking to a certificate authority. And the certificate authority is somebody who can create new certificates for us. So by default with Caddy, without any configuration, it will be using Let's Encrypt and also 0SSL. So those will be used by default unless you specify otherwise with Caddy. Now, Caddy will be talking to the certificate authority for us. And basically, it will ask the certificate authority for a certificate, and they will respond that you have a challenge to solve before we can give you one. And this can be a DNS or HTTPS challenge. So basically, if we take a look at the DNS challenge, for instance, that would mean somehow proving that we are the owners of the domain. And this is usually done by adding some kind of value to your DNS records. And once we have done that, the certificate authority knows that, okay, you are the true owner of this domain. And then Caddy can send back to them something called a certificate signing request, or also known as CSR. And this CSR contains information such as the public key used for the crypto. Once it's received by the certificate authority, they can hand us our certificate and everyone is happy. And once we have the certificate, we're good to go using HTTPS or TLS. And everything here is done automatically for us by Caddy, or should I say the Acme Protocol. One thing with Caddy is that not only does it by default use two certificate authorities, so if one of these would not respond anymore, if the certificate signing request fails for whatever reason, it will actually fall back by default to the second authority. So that's also really amazing. Okay, so before we start setting up Caddy, let's also make a quick note that there are three ways in which you can configure Caddy. You can configure Caddy using a API, Caddy file, which is a file using a special syntax only for Caddy, which we will be using when we're setting up our Caddy server. There's also JSON configurations file. So you have to decide which one suits your needs. My recommendation is to use the API or the JSON configurations whenever you have dynamic services, such as maybe endpoints that needs to be programmatically modified and changed. Then the API is great. But working with Caddy files, as you probably will see real shortly, is that it's really easy. The syntax is super easy and they are kind of fast to set up. To get started with the magic of Caddy, we first need to install it. There's a ton of supported option if you visit their website on how to install it. You can use Docker and you can use a bare bone installation. Caddy comes as a single binary, so it's pretty easy to use. In this tutorial, I will be using Caddy installed on a Ubuntu machine, and it's as easy as copying the commands and running them. Once you run these commands, you should be able to use Caddy in the command line. Note that this installation will run Caddy as a system service, so it's important to understand that. And go to my terminal and simply paste them in. It will prompt me for my password, and we should see a bunch of stuff being installed. Once the commands are done, you should be able to use Caddy to see information being printed. Now, remember that installing Caddy like this on a bare-bone machine will start the system service. So we are now having a Caddy running on my machine, but by default, Caddy doesn't do anything. The default installation is a 0 configuration. We can make sure Caddy is running by curling localhost port 2019/config, and we can pipe the output to JQ to get a nice print. And you can see this is our current configuration on the Caddy server. So it's listening on port 80, and it's handling a simple file server and a user. And this means that Caddy is up and running. We're getting a response on port 80. Now, what did I curl? We curled 2019, which is the default port for the Caddy API. So a Caddy server comes with an API that you can use to manage it, and it's by default on port 2019. So Caddy is up and running on my server here, and that's great. Let's take a look at Caddy because we don't want to run it as a service while we are testing it. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and show you guys the difference between a few commands. We can run Caddy stop. That will stop my server. If I go ahead and curl it now, I won't get any response. So there is 2 commands to run Caddy. One of them is Caddy start, which will run the Caddy server as a background service. So if I run Caddy start, it will start in the background. You can also see a bit of information, such as the address, etc. I'm gonna go ahead and stop it again. And I'm gonna go ahead and this time use the Caddy run. Caddy run allows us to run Caddy inside my terminal. And it's very useful when you're testing your new configurations and you want to see what's going on. And you can easily have it running like this. So that's what we're going to do during this tutorial. So let's begin by configuring the Caddy server using our Caddy file to act as a reverse proxy to begin with. Now we will be writing our first Caddy file to learn how that works. So we're going to do a simple hello world response thing to just get the hang of it and see what's going on. And before we begin, I'm gonna make sure that Caddy isn't running because we want to run it in the terminal. And we're going to see how easy it is to set up Caddy on localhost to get a HTTPS service running. So we're going to begin by creating a new file called Caddy file, which will be our configuration. Now, we can, whenever we do Caddy run, we can specify the --config to specify which Caddy file we're going to load during the startup. And we can simply insert our Caddy file like this. So we make sure that Caddy starts with the configuration that we are actually currently developing. And I'm going to go ahead and open my Caddy file. And once we have this Caddy file, we're gonna take a look at the very simple syntax of Caddy. You begin by specifying the name of your domain. Let's go ahead and make sure we want to host a app.localhost. And app.localhost is the domain name. So you always type your domain name here as a server block to tell Caddy that on this domain we want to do something. And that something will be, in this case, a simple respond, hello from Caddy. So this configuration is super basic. On the domain app.localhost, respond with this. Let's go ahead and save that. And, well, let's run it. That's all you need to do to create a HTTP route on your localhost, which automatically renews your certificate. By the way, and before we run this, I want to mention that .localhost is a kind of magic prefix in Caddy. So to make certificates for your localhost, which, well, you have to use makecert or something. But if the domain name ends with .localhost, Caddy will automatically manage the certificate for you. So any domain name with .localhost is a special domain. If you want to learn more about the special addresses, there's a blog on their website for these. So as you can see here, you can see localhost is special and Caddy will act on that. So let's go ahead. We want to run this. So before we run this, I'm actually going to run Caddy as sudo. The reason why I want to run Caddy as sudo is because Caddy requires root access to install the certificates. So whenever you have generated a certificate, it needs to be installed on the server, and Caddy will do this for you, but it does need permission. So I'm just going to go and run sudo. And if you don't want to use sudo, you can take a look at the manual installation block. You can configure a Caddy to run without it, but you need to set up the permissions for the correct folders, etc. And we're going to go Caddy run. And if you do Caddy run, it will automatically detect any file named Caddy file in your directory. So if I run it here, it will automatically search for this file. If this file isn't present, we can use the --config to tell Caddy where to find it. But for now, we can simply run Caddy run. You can see a bunch of stuff is happening that didn't happen before. It's actually installing the root certificate. And it's actually telling us that we need to run Caddy font, which we can do, which will just format our Caddy file. Let's go ahead. Let's just do that before we do anything else to make sure that we don't have any errors. Let's font and let's run it again. So you can actually take a look at the information. We can see enabled automatic TLS certificate management for the domain app.localhost. And this is pretty cool. Now, to make sure this works, let's go ahead and open our browser. And let's just visit HTTPS. We're going to localhost. We're going to app.localhost. And notice that we're using HTTPS to the localhost. You can see it's not, you might see this since we're using a localhost right now. So this is due to, so this security warning is because we're on localhost. Of course, we don't have a valid domain, but we do get a hello from Caddy. You see how easy it was to set up Caddy? Like seriously. Let's take a look at the Caddy file. This is everything we needed to do, which is pretty amazing. But we're not done yet. This was kind of basic example, right? To make this a little bit more interesting, we should go ahead and host an application so we can see how we can use Caddy as a reverse proxy, for instance, to do TLS termination for our service. And to do that, let's go ahead and just create a simple main.go. I'm going to create a super small Go program that simply hosts a help endpoint that we can ping or check to see that our application is up and running. So I'm going to create a main function, and I'm going to allow us to insert a port flag so we can determine which port to use. Let's use 8080 by default, and this is the port to host the server. Port to host the server. And we're going to do a flag.parse. And let's just create a HTTP handler in Go, which should look like this. And whenever we get a request, we just want to log. Let's just say we got a help request. That's just going to print to the standard out that our request was received. We're going to respond to the caller, and we're just going to say, okay, that's a simple health check, right? And let's also make sure that we host this on a HTTPS server. So we're simply going to create a URL, which is using the port. And let's print starting server on, and let's print that. And let's print out the address. And then let's start the server. And we do that simply by HTTP listen and serve. And we're doing it on our address. And we don't have a HTTP handler in this case. And if anything goes wrong, let's just print it for now. Fail on server. Just print the error. And let's change this to a printf. So this is a super simple, oh my bad. And let's change this to just use println instead. And we've covered the errors. Let's skip the Go PLS error. So this is a simple Go program which will host a HTTP server with a /help endpoint, which we can use to call. And in our address here, we need to make sure that we're using a pointer to the string. So make sure we do that. And then I'm going to open a new terminal, and I'm going to run port 8081. So I'm now running a Golang server on port 8081. Let's go back to our Caddy file to see how we can use expose this. I'm going to open our Caddy file.
Hi everyone, I just wanted to thank BetterStack for sponsoring this video. If you're looking for top-notch log management and monitoring, BetterStack has got you covered. BetterStack offers powerful tools that help you monitor your entire infrastructure, analyze logs, and ensure that your applications run smoothly. BetterStack's intuitive dashboards and real-time alerts make it easy to stay on top of any issues before they become a problem. BetterStack can help you monitor uptimes, help you with monitoring logs and metrics. Not only that, integrating BetterStack into your infrastructure is really easy by using their interactive connection setup. You select your platform, and there is a ton of platforms supported. Everything from Debian to Docker, Heroku, .NET, AWS, and a lot of other stuff. Basically everything is available. So if you need reliable uptime monitoring and log management, do like many of the other big companies and check out BetterStack. Thank you for sponsoring.
And I'm going to add a new domain. I'm just going to do a new block here, and I'm going to call it service. And I'm going to call it my service.localhost. And we will be doing a reverse proxy. So in Caddy, you can specify reverse proxy. And then after reverse proxy, you add where it can find the real application. So I'm just going to do localhost 8081. So we're safe. any requests coming into the Caddy server on service.localhost will be reverse proxied towards localhost 8081. That's pretty simple. So let's save this file. I'm also gonna do a Caddy funct override just to make sure that everything's fine. And let's do a Caddy run as sudo so that we can install the certificate. And you should be able to see it's now printing service.localhost. So Caddy is running. Let's create a new terminal and let's just curl. I'm just gonna curl https service.localhost/health, which is where our application is having an endpoint, and I'm receiving OK. If I go back to my Go server, you can see got a help request. So that's how you set up a reverse proxy using Caddy, and I have to say it's pretty damn easy compared to many of the other options out there. Not only do we have a reverse proxy, we have automatic TLS management. This is just going to keep renewing my TLS certificates. Right now they're localhost, so we will cover that shortly. So there's much more you can do with Caddy. We have only looked at how we can use a reverse proxy. Let's take a look at load balancing and health checks, and then after that we will set up a real domain to use Caddy. So load balancing is another great feature of Caddy, and load balancing is when you set up a set of multiple instances, so-called upstreams. So maybe in our use case we will be running the Go service on 2 ports, for instance, but these could be on 2 different servers, so you would have redundancy. So we're going to set up Caddy for load balancing, and it's basically, so we have our Caddy server and we have requests coming in, and we're going to tell Caddy that we have something called upstreams, and these upstreams are of course our applications running on port 8081, for instance. But we're also going to tell Caddy that this application can also be found on port 8082. This way we can have redundancy and we can easily tell Caddy to do this for us. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Open up a terminal, and I'm going to go to my folder where I keep the Go program, and I'm going to run it. But this time I'm going to run it on port 8082. Apart from that, we need to go back to our Caddy file because we need to update it. Now, we're gonna still use a reverse proxy, but we want to load balance between our 2 applications. We can easily do that by simply typing the URL to the second service after the first. So these are our 2 upstream servers running our Golang application, and once we have that, we can do brackets to add options. So we can add load balancing options. And in our case, we're going to say that the load balancing policy will be a round robin. And a round robin will be that it sends the first request to this one, the second request to the second one, and then round and round we go. Now, of course, to learn more about the different load balancing items, you can use the amazing documentation in Caddy to learn more about it. There's a lot of things that you can configure. Such as retries, etc., how often it should retry, and how often you should retry, and other settings. This is a simple load balancing between our 2 services. I'm just going to go ahead and restart the Caddy server to show you guys that this is actually working as expected. So I'm going to do sudo caddy run, and I am going to go back to my curl, and I'm going to curl a few times. And let's go to our Golang terminals, and you should see now they both are getting requests. So we're load balancing between the 2 of them using Caddy. The requests are going to Caddy, and Caddy just kind of reverse proxies them to the correct application. So let's take a look at health checks also, because that's pretty important. If you have a load balancer, you need to configure stuff like how will we know that the application is up and running? How should the load balancer know when a application is down or not? And that's pretty easy in Caddy as well. So we can specify something called a health path. This is a path in which Caddy can send requests to validate that the application is up and running. So I'm gonna go ahead and add our health/health. That means it will send requests to localhost 8081/health and also 8082/health to make sure that the services are up and running. Now we can specify how often by health interval, for instance. So each 5th second, and we can set a timeout for 2 seconds. This is how long we will wait for a response from the health endpoint. So if it takes more than 2 seconds, we will consider the service down. And we can also specify the health status. We want 200. This is the HTTP code that we are expecting. If we get anything other than 200, we will know something is up. So we can save this and we can go ahead and do Caddy run again. And I'm going to jump to my Golang services, and you will see that we are now getting help requests to our service. Now, what if one server goes down? If I shut down 8082 like this, I've shut that down. Now you can see it keeps sending requests, and if we go to the Caddy server, you can see that we're getting errors now. So the health checker is actually responding. And if I go back to my curl, I shouldn't even notice. You see, everything keeps working. It has detected that this application is down, so it just keeps forwarding us to 8081. And of course, if I were to rerun my program, you can see it automatically starts ingesting new requests again. So Caddy as a load balancer reverse proxy is super easy to set up, and it makes using HTTPS on your local host with real domain names really easy. And I like that because I've noticed sometimes where I'm developing an application, then we're gonna go production, we switch to HTTPS, and there might be unforeseen problems. So I just kind of always run it to always have HTTPS on whatever. It's super simple to use. So to use Caddy with a real domain, you need to do one thing. You need to go into your DNS provider or wherever you have your DNS. I'm going to show you how I'm using Cloudflare right now. And I'm going to use Cloudflare to add my DNS record for Caddy. It's an A record in your DNS provider. You can name it wherever you want. But I'm going to use Caddy as a subdomain, so I'm naming my Caddy. You need to insert the IP address of your server that will host Caddy. This should go towards your Caddy instance. And once you've added a DNS record for your Caddy server, you can start up Caddy and add the domain. So I'm just going to go into my droplets. And I'm going to do a new Caddy file on my droplets. And I want to add the domain name A record that I used. In my case, it was caddy.mydomain, which is percybalmer.work. I want to do a reverse proxy. And I wanted to use localhost 8080 in my case. So any requests going to caddy.percybalmer.work will be reverse proxied into the service running on 8080. I'm going to go ahead and run my main.go. I'm going to specify port 8080 so that my service starts running on port 8080. In my case, I'm just going to put that in the background for now. So it's up and running. Let's go ahead and make sure we do Caddy run. Has configured the domain for caddy.percybalmer.work. So it's the same thing as when you're doing localhost. You don't have to change anything. Just in your Caddy file, you put the domain name. We can simply open up a new browser and do caddy.percybalmer.work. And I'm also going to visit /health because that's our endpoint. And what do you know? we're getting a response from our server using Caddy, and it's HTTPS, and the certificate will keep on renewing, and everything is done automatically for us. I just want to quickly mention that when you're running Caddy, maybe you don't want to do Caddy run. And one thing that is good to know is that Caddy will automatically search for a Caddy configuration whenever the system service starts up inside /etc/caddy/caddy file. I'm just going to go ahead and copy my Caddy file to that location. And then whenever I do Caddy start, Caddy will be running in the background, and you can see it's using my configuration because we're seeing the domain being picked up. So that's pretty good if you want to start using it. Before we sum this tutorial up, I think it's important that we start talking about advanced features and monitoring. And Caddy has support for many advanced features, such as configuring where to store data. As you can see, by default, it's using a file storage on the machine, but you can configure this to use whatever you want. You can configure custom CA routes to use, and a lot of the options are found inside the Caddy documentation, and I'm really impressed with the Caddy documentation. I feel it's very well structured and easy to read, so I recommend you to take a look at all the options that are available. Now, one thing that's really important is actually, I'm just going to go ahead and modify our Caddy file because I want to add something that I feel is really important. And inside Caddy, you can use a global configuration, and that is done by having this super simple empty without a domain name block. And in here we can insert the configurations that we want to use. One such thing is the email. The email configuration will allow you to specify an email address that will receive emails when there are issues with grabbing a new certificate. And that might be really important if maybe for some reason somebody removed your DNS record and it can no longer renew your certificate, and you want to be notified with that. So I'm just going to go ahead on my server and specify my email. So now Caddy can include this information to the certificate authority, so you can receive an email whenever there's an issue. And one other thing that I find super important and super nice is the server block, where you can configure specific stuff for your server. And one of them is if you add metrics like this, you have a server block with the name metrics. And if we save this, Caddy will automatically, and we can do Caddy reload, and I'm just gonna specify my Caddy file because otherwise it will use my non-production file. So I'm reloading the configuration, and reload will, update your current configuration for the service, which is great. Once that is done, we can actually do a curl on localhost 2019/metrics. And you will see Prometheus metrics being printed, which can be used to automatically detect if there's any errors currently. You can see how many upstreams you have up and running, and this can be used to monitor to know, like, if for instance, when we turned one of the upstreams down before, that would change from a 2 to a 1, and we can use that to monitor. So metrics is really important to include. All right, I hope this tutorial has shown you how to set up a Caddy server for that sweet automatic enablement of HTTP TLS and also the renewal. And I hope you understand that using Caddy leaves you with no work. Everything is done automatically for you. And I feel Caddy is a fresh breeze in the server management, since it's very easy to configure, it's very easy to use, and Again, you don't have to worry about the certificates or anything. It just kind of seems magical and works. I'm really impressed with the Caddy files as well, how easy they are to use. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you will set out and try Caddy to see how you can use it and see if you can start using it in production.